Section 43 of the World's Best Orations, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. The World's Best Orations, from the earliest period to the present time, Volume 1, by David J. Brewer and Edward A. Allen. The Meaning of Conservatism, Part 1, Lord Beaconsfield. Gentlemen, the chairman has correctly reminded you that this is not the first time that my voice has been heard in this hall, but that was an occasion very different from that which now assembles us together. It was nearly 30 years ago, when I endeavoured to support and stimulate the flagging energies of an institution in which I thought there were the germs of future refinement and intellectual advantage to the rising generation of Manchester. And since I have been here on this occasion, I have learned with much gratification that it is now counted among your most flourishing institutions. There was also another and more recent occasion when the gracious office fell to me to distribute among the members of the Mechanics Institution those prizes which they had gained through their study in letters and in science. Gentlemen, these were pleasing offices, and if life consisted only of such offices, you would not have to complain of it. But life has its masculine duties, and we are assembled here to fulfil some of the most important of these, when, as citizens of a free country, we are assembled together to declare our determination to maintain, to uphold the Constitution to which we are debtors, in our opinion, for our freedom and our welfare. Gentlemen, there seems at first something incongruous that one should be addressing the population of so influential and intelligent a county as Lancashire, who is not locally connected with them. And, gentlemen, I will frankly admit that this circumstance did for a long time make me hesitate in accepting your cordial and generous invitation. But, gentlemen, after what occurred yesterday, after receiving more than 200 addresses from every part of this great county, after the welcome which then greeted me, I feel that I should not be doing justice to your feelings. I should not do my duty to myself if I any longer consider my presence here tonight to be an act of presumption. Gentlemen, though it may not be an act of presumption, it still is, I am told, an act of great difficulty. Our opponents assure us that the Conservative Party has no political programme, and therefore they must look with much satisfaction to one whom you honour tonight by considering him the leader and representative of your opinions when he comes forward, at your invitation, to express to you what that programme is. The Conservative Party are accused of having no programme of policy. If by a programme is meant a plan to despoil churches and plunder landlords, I admit we have no programme. If by a programme is meant a policy which assails and menaces every institution and every interest, every class and every calling in the country, I admit we have no programme. But if to have a policy with distinct ends, and these such as most deeply interest the great body of the nation, be a becoming programme for a political party, then I contend we have an adequate programme, and one which here or elsewhere I shall always be prepared to assert and to vindicate. Gentlemen, the programme of the Conservative Party is to maintain the Constitution of the country. I have not come down to Manchester to deliver an essay on the English Constitution, but when the banner of republicanism is unfurled, when the fundamental principles of our institutions are controverted, I think, perhaps, it may not be inconvenient that I should make some few practical remarks upon the character of our Constitution upon that monarchy limited by the coordinate authority of the Estates of the Realm, which, under the title of Queen, Lords, and Commons, has contributed so greatly to the prosperity of this country, and with the maintenance of which I believe that prosperity is bound up. Gentlemen, since the settlement of that Constitution, now nearly 2 centuries ago, England has never experienced a revolution, though there is no country in which there has been so continuous and considerable change. How is this? Because the wisdom of your forefathers placed the prize of supreme power without the sphere of human passions. Whatever the struggle of parties, whatever the strife of factions, Whatever the excitement and exaltation of the public mind, there has always been something in this country round which all classes and parties could rally, representing the majesty of the law, the administration of justice, and involving, at the same time, the security for every man's rights and the fountain of honour. Now, gentlemen, it is well clearly to comprehend what is meant by a country not having a revolution for 2 centuries. It means, for that space, the unbroken exercise and enjoyment of the ingenuity of man. It means, for that space, the continuous application of the discoveries of science to his comfort and convenience. It means the accumulation of capital, the elevation of labour, the establishment of those admirable factories which cover your district, the unwearied improvement of the cultivation of the land, which is extracted from a somewhat churlish soil, harvests more exuberant than those furnished by lands nearer to the sun. It means the continuous order which is the only parent of personal liberty and political right. And you owe all these, gentlemen, to the throne. There is another powerful and most beneficial influence which is also exercised by the Crown. Gentlemen, I am a party man. I believe that without party, parliamentary government is impossible. I look upon parliamentary government as the noblest government in the world, and certainly the one most suited to England. But without the discipline of political connection, animated by the principle of private honour, I feel certain that a popular assembly would sink before the power or the corruption of a minister. Yet, gentlemen, I am not blind to the faults of party government. It has one great defect. Party has a tendency to warp the intelligence, and there is no minister, however resolved he may be in treating a great public question, who does not find some difficulty in emancipating himself from the traditionary prejudice on which he has long acted. It is, therefore, a great merit in our Constitution that before a minister introduces a measure to Parliament, he must submit it to an intelligence superior to all party, and entirely free from influences of that character. I know it will be said, gentlemen, that however beautiful in theory, the personal influence of the sovereign is now absorbed in the responsibility of the minister. Gentlemen, I think you will find there is a great fallacy in this view. The principles of the English Constitution do not contemplate the absence of personal influence on the part of the sovereign. And if they did, the principles of human nature would prevent the fulfilment of such a theory. Gentlemen, I need not tell you that I am now making on this subject abstract observations of a general application to our institutions and our history. But take the case of a sovereign of England, who accedes to his throne at the earliest age the law permits, and who enjoys a long reign. Take an instance like that of George III. From the earliest moment of his accession, that sovereign is placed in constant communication with the most able statesmen of the period, and of all parties. Even with average ability, it is impossible not to perceive that such a sovereign must soon attain the great mass of political information and political experience. Information and experience, gentlemen, whether they are possessed by a sovereign or by the humblest of his subjects, are irresistible in life. No man with the vast responsibility that devolves upon an English minister can afford to treat with indifference a suggestion that has not occurred to him, or information with which he has not been previously supplied. But, gentlemen, pursue this view of the subject. The longer the reign, the influence of that sovereign must proportionately increase. All the illustrious statesmen who served his youth disappear. A new generation of public servants rises up. There is a critical conjunction in affairs, a moment of perplexity and peril. Then it is that the sovereign can appeal to a similar state of affairs that occurred perhaps 30 years before. When all are in doubt among his servants, he can quote the advice that was given by the illustrious men of his early years. And though he may maintain himself within the strictest limits of the Constitution, Who can suppose, when such information and such suggestions are made by the most exalted person of the country, that they can be without effect? No, gentlemen. A minister who could venture to treat such influence with indifference would not be a constitutional minister, but an arrogant idiot. Gentlemen, the influence of the Crown is not confined merely to political affairs. England is a domestic country. Here the home is revered, and the hearth is sacred. The nation is represented by a family, the royal family. And if that family is educated with a sense of responsibility and a sentiment of public duty, it is difficult to exaggerate the salutary influence they may exercise over a nation. It is not merely an influence upon manners. It is not merely that they are a model for refinement and for good taste. They affect the heart as well as the intelligence of the people, and in the hour of public adversity, or in the anxious conjuncture of public affairs, the nation rallies around the family and the throne, and its spirit is animated and sustained by the expression of public affection. Gentlemen, there is yet one other remark that I would make upon our monarchy, though had it not been for recent circumstances I should have refrained from doing so. An attack has recently been made upon the throne on account of the costliness of the institution. Gentlemen, I shall not dwell upon the fact that if the people of England appreciate the monarchy, as I believe they do, it would be painful to them that their royal and representative family should not be maintained with becoming dignity, or fill in the public eye a position inferior to some of the nobles of the land. Nor will I insist upon what is unquestionably the fact, that the revenues of the Crown estates, on which our sovereign might live with as much right as the Duke of Bedford or the Duke of Northumberland has to his estates, are now paid into the public exchequer. All this, upon the present occasion, I am not going to insist upon. What I now say is this, that there is no sovereignty of any first-rate state which costs so little to the people as the sovereignty of England. I will not compare our civil list with those of European empires, because it is known that in amount they treble and quadruple it. But I will compare it with the cost of sovereignty in a republic, and that a republic with which you are intimately acquainted, the Republic of the United States of America. Gentlemen, there is no analogy between the position of our sovereign, Queen Victoria, and that of the President of the United States. The President of the United States is not the sovereign of the United States. There is a very near analogy between the position of the President of the United States and that of the Prime Minister of England, and both are paid at much the same rate, the income of a second-class professional man. The sovereign of the United States is the people, and I will now show you what the sovereignty of the United States costs. Gentlemen, you are aware of the Constitution of the United States. There are 37 independent states, each with a sovereign legislature. Besides these, there is a confederation of states to conduct their external affairs, which consists of the House of Representatives and a Senate. There are 285 members of the House of Representatives, and there are 74 members of the Senate, making altogether 359 members of Congress. Now each member of Congress receives £1,000 sterling per annum. In addition to this, he receives an allowance called mileage, which varies according to the distance which he travels, but the aggregate cost of which is about £30,000 per annum. That makes £389,000, almost the exact amount of our civil list. But this, gentlemen, will allow you to make only a very imperfect estimate of the cost of sovereignty in the United States. Every member of every legislature in the 37 states is also paid. There are, I believe, 5,010 members of state legislatures who receive about $350 per annum each. As some of the returns are imperfect, the average which I have given of expenditure may be rather high, and therefore I have not counted the mileage, which is also universally allowed. 5,010 members of state legislatures at $350 each make $1,753,500 or £350,700 a year. So you see, gentlemen, that the immediate expenditure for the sovereignty of the United States is between £700,000 and £800,000 a year. Gentlemen, I have not time to pursue this interesting theme. Otherwise I could show you that you have still but perfectly ascertained the cost of sovereignty in a republic. But, gentlemen, I cannot resist giving you one further illustration. The government of this country is considerably carried on by the aid of royal commissions. So great is the increase of public business that it would be probably impossible for a minister to carry on affairs without this assistance. The Queen of England can command for these objects the services of the most experienced statesmen and men of the highest position in society. If necessary, she can summon to them distinguished scholars or men most celebrated in science and in arts, and she receives from them services that are unpaid. They are only too proud to be described in the commission as Her Majesty's trusty counsellors. And if any member of these commissions performs some transcendent services, both of thought and of labour, he is munificently rewarded by a public distinction conferred upon him by the Fountain of Honour. Gentlemen, the government of the United States has, I believe, not less availed itself of the services of commissions than the government of the United Kingdom. But in a country where there is no Fountain of Honour, every member of these commissions is paid. Gentlemen, I trust I have now made some suggestions to you respecting the monarchy of England, which at least may be so far serviceable that when we are separated they may not be altogether without advantage. And now, gentlemen, I would like to say something on the subject of the House of Lords. It is not merely the authority of the throne that is now disputed, but the character and the influence of the House of Lords that are held up by some to public disregard. Gentlemen, I shall not stop for a moment to offer you any proofs of the advantage of a second chamber, and for this reason. That subject has been discussed now for a century, ever since the establishment of the government of the United States, and all great authorities, American, German, French, Italian, have agreed in this, that representative government is impossible without a second chamber. And it has been, especially of late, maintained by great political writers in all countries, that the repeated failure of what is called the French Republic is mainly to be ascribed to its not having a second chamber. But, gentlemen, however anxious foreign countries have been to enjoy this advantage, that anxiety has only been equalled by the difficulty which they have found in fulfilling their object. How is a second chamber to be constituted? By nominees of the sovereign power? What influence can be exercised by a chamber of nominees? Are they to be bound by popular election? In what manner are they to be elected? If by the same constituency as the popular body, what claim have they under such circumstances to criticise or to control the decisions of that body? If they are to be elected by a more select body, qualified by a higher franchise, there immediately occurs the objection: why should the majority be governed by the minority? The United States of America were fortunate in finding a solution of this difficulty. But the United States of America had elements to deal with which have never occurred before, and never probably will occur again, because they formed their illustrious Senate from materials that were offered them by the 37 states. We, gentlemen, have the House of Lords, an assembly which has historically developed and periodically adapted itself to the wants and necessities of the times. What, gentlemen, is the first quality which is required in a second chamber? Without doubt, independence. What is the best foundation of independence? Without doubt, property. The Prime Minister of England has only recently told you, and I believe he spoke quite accurately, that the average income of the members of the House of Lords is £20,000 per annum. Of course, there are some who have more and some who have less, that the influence of a public assembly, so far as property is concerned, depends upon its aggregate property, which in the present case is a revenue of £9,000,000 a year. But, gentlemen, you must look to the nature of this property. It is visible property, and therefore it is responsible property, which every ratepayer in the room knows to his cost. But, gentlemen, it is not only visible property, it is, generally speaking, territorial property. And one of the elements of territorial property is that it is representative. Now, for illustration, suppose, which God forbid, that there was no House of Commons, and any Englishman, I will take him from either end of the island, a Cumberland or a Cornish man, finds himself aggrieved. The Cumbrian says, "This conduct I experience is most unjust. I know a Cumberland man in the House of Lords, the Earl of Carlisle or the Earl of Lonsdale. I will go to him. He will never see a Cumberland man ill-treated." The Cornish man will say, "I will go to the Lord of Port Eliot. His family have sacrificed themselves before this for the liberties of Englishmen, and he will get justice done me." But, gentlemen, the charge against the House of Lords is that dignities are hereditary, and we are told that if we have a House of Peers, there should be peers for life. There are great authorities in favour of this, and even my noble friend near me, Lord Derby, the other day gave in his adhesion to an limited application of this principle. Now, gentlemen, in the first place, let me observe that every peer is a peer for life, as he cannot be a peer after his death. But some peers for life had succeeded in their dignities by their children. The question arises, who is most responsible? A peer for life whose dignities are not descendable, or a peer for life whose dignities are hereditary? Now, gentlemen, a peer for life is in a very strong position. He says, "Here I am, I have got power, and I will exercise it." I have no doubt that on the whole a peer for life would exercise it for what he deemed was the public good. Let us hope that. But after all, he might and could exercise it according to his own will. Nobody can call him to account. He is independent of everybody. But a peer for life whose dignities descend is in a very different position. He has every inducement to study public opinion, and, when he believes it just, to yield, because he naturally feels that if the order to which he belongs is in constant collision with public opinion, the chances are that his dignities will not descend to his posterity. Therefore, gentlemen, I am not prepared myself to believe that a solution of any difficulties in the public mind on this subject is to be found by creating peers for life. I know there are some philosophers who believe that the best substitute for the House of Lords would be an assembly formed of ex-governors of colonies. I have not sufficient experience on that subject to give a decided opinion about it. When the muse of comedy threw her frolic grace over society, a retired governor was generally one of the characters in every comedy. And the last of our great actors, who, by the way, was a great favourite at Manchester, Mr. Farron, was celebrated for his delineation of the character in question. Whether it be the recollection of that performance or not, I confess I am inclined to believe that an English gentleman, born to business, managing his own estate, administering the affairs of his county, mixing with all classes of his fellow men, now in the hunting field, now in the railway direction, unaffected, unostentatious, proud of his ancestors, if they have contributed to the greatness of our common country, is, on the whole, more likely to form a senator agreeable to English opinion and English taste than any substitute that has yet been produced. Gentlemen, let me make one observation more on the subject of the House of Lords before I conclude. There is some advantage in political experience. I remember the time when there was a similar outcry against the House of Lords, but much more intense and powerful. And, gentlemen, it arose from the same cause. A liberal government had been installed in office, with an immense liberal majority. They proposed some violent measures. The House of Lords modified some, delayed others, and some they threw out. Instantly there was a cry to abolish or to reform the House of Lords, and the greatest popular orator, Daniel O'Connell, that probably ever existed was sent on a pilgrimage over England to excite the people in favour of this opinion. What happened? That happened, gentlemen, which may happen tomorrow. There was a dissolution of Parliament. The great Liberal majority vanished. The balance of parties was restored. It was discovered that the House of Lords had behind them at least half of the English people. We heard no more cries for their abolition or their reform. And before 2 years more passed, England was really governed by the House of Lords under the wise influence of the Duke of Wellington and the commanding eloquence of Lyndhurst, and such was the enthusiasm of the nation in favour of the Second Chamber that at every public meeting its health was drunk, with the additional sentiment, for which we are indebted to one of the most distinguished members that ever represented the House of Commons, "Thank God there's a House of Lords." End of section 43.